Okay, folks, picture this. You're at an open mic storytelling night and someone takes the stage and they launch into an incredible tale about their uncle escaping from a war-torn country with nothing but a suitcase and determination. It sounds amazing on paper, but something feels off. The storyteller is describing events, reciting facts, but you're not really feeling anything. 5 minutes in, your mind starts to wander. Now imagine a different storyteller taking the stage, and they tell about the time they found their uncle's suitcase up in the attic, and they tell about what that discovery meant to them. Suddenly you're leaning in. You're feeling something. Well, what's the difference? Both of the stories are about the same uncle, the same suitcase, but only one of them is telling a story that actually belongs to the storyteller. And if you're just starting out in storytelling, understanding this distinction might be the most important lesson that you are going to learn. My name is Ladi Loera, and I'm a storytelling teacher and coach in Austin, Texas. And I love storytelling. So let's talk about it. Today, we're going to talk about why you should never tell someone else's story and how to find a story that is truly yours. So, first off, why is it that other people's stories just don't work? Well, let's start with something that seems obvious, but is actually easy to forget. When you tell a personal story, you are the story, not the events, not the other people involved, not the details. You. Think about something funny that happened to your mom, or a story about your uncle, or a story about your grandfather. These are great stories to share around the family dinner table. Your relatives are going to love them because they knew these people. They have their own connections to them. They have their own memories of them. But when you are telling an audience a story about someone that they've never met, your mom, your uncle, or your grandfather, something gets lost. Why does this happen? Well, think about this. Years ago, the piano that John Lennon wrote the song Imagine on was traveling the world. He went on a tour, the piano, by itself. John Lennon was already dead. There was no concert. No one was performing on the piano. It was just the piano sitting there. And people lined up to see it, to touch it, to be in the presence of the piano that inspired John Lennon to write the song Imagine. A Steinway is a piano you can buy for around $40,000, but George Michael paid $1.5 million for this piano. Why? It's just a piano, right? The reason the piano is so important is because the piano is part of the team that created the song. It was there in that moment when inspiration hit John Lennon, when John Lennon was touching the keys as he was inspired to write this beautiful song. The piano is connected in a direct and meaningful way, in a tangible way. Writing the song Imagine is part of the piano's story. Now here's a question. Do you think people would have lined up to see a light bulb from the pantry that John Lennon had? Probably not. The light bulb may have been in his house, but it had nothing to do with what we know about John Lennon. It's not really part of his story. And that is exactly what happens when you tell a story that is someone else's story. You become the light bulb, and your audience can feel that distance between you and the story you're trying to relate to them. The value of a story doesn't come from the events themselves. It comes from the storyteller's direct experience of those events. Your feelings, your memories, your understanding of what happened and what it meant. And here's a hard truth. Whether or not they realize it, the audience can tell that you're not directly involved in the story. When you're removed from the experience, the story becomes less compelling. Not because the events aren't interesting, but because we can't connect with your experience because you don't have one. So then, how can you make a story truly yours? Well, let me explain. I have keepsakes. We all do. I have cards, gifts, even old emails that make me smile or cry when I come across them. Here's the thing though. These cards, these gifts, these emails are essentially meaningless to anyone except for me. A birthday card from 10 years ago, it's just paper and ink. A jacket that belonged to someone I loved who's no longer here, well, to you it's just fabric and buttons. An old notebook that a friend gave me. To me, these things are incredibly valuable, not because the objects themselves are special, but because the story I tell myself about them is. You see, the value is not in the keepsake. It's in my experience of the keepsake, in my memory, in my story. This is the key to understanding what makes a story, your story, a story that you can tell. You can't tell your uncle's war story because the experience was his. Those memories are his. Those feelings belonged to him. You can tell us how his choices shaped you and your family. Do you see the difference? In the second version, you're not trying to inhabit your uncle's experience. You're sharing your own experience of him, your feelings and the impact on your life. The story is authentically yours because the feelings you're describing, they belong to you. Here's how to test whether a story is yours to tell or not. Ask yourselves, whose feeling am I describing? Whose internal experience am I trying to share? If the answer is your own, if what you're talking about is what you felt, what you feared, what you learned, then it's your story. But if you're trying to explain what someone else felt or thought or experienced, then you're telling their story. Hey, do me a favor. If this has been helpful for you in your storytelling career, please go through down here somewhere and find the like button and give that thing a big old boop. I would truly appreciate it. Let's try another example. Let's say your best friend went through a terrible breakup and you were there for all of it. You saw him cry, you heard the details. Can you tell the story of that breakup on stage? No. That's their heartbreak, their loss, their journey. But you can tell the story of what it's like to support your friend through a bad time in their life. You can tell us about the moment when you realized you didn't know how to help someone you loved. And you can tell us what you learned about yourself as a friend. Because now you are talking about your experience, your growth. And that makes the story your story. The rule is simple. Stay in your own lane. Talk about your emotional experience. Tell us what you saw, what you felt, what it means to you. The moment you try to speak for someone else, you crossed a line. Because no matter what anyone tells you, you can never truly know what someone else is feeling, thinking, or experiencing. Okay, so now that you understand that principle, maybe you're thinking to yourself, but the most interesting thing that ever happened in my family was my uncle's war experience. What can I do if I can't share it? Look, I get it completely. Here's the good news. You probably can share it. You just need to find your angle. You need to find where you intersect with the story in a meaningful way, in an emotional way. And let me show you how this works. If your uncle escaped a dangerous situation to move to another country, that's his story. That's his fear. That's his courage, his uncertainty. Those were all his. But what's your story? Maybe it's the story of growing up and hearing this story, this tale, and feeling the weight of his sacrifice every time you complain about anything trivial. Maybe it's about that moment you faced your own scary choice and asked yourself, well, what would my uncle do? Do you see what's happening here? You're not retelling his experience. You're telling us about your relationship to his experience. And that is a completely different story. That is your story. And here's another angle. Sometimes your story is about the absence of someone else's story. Maybe you never got to hear your uncle's stories because he died before you were old enough to ask those questions. Maybe he didn't talk to you about his past. Your story could have been about the loss, about the silence, about what it means to grow up with gaps in your family history. Or maybe the story is about that moment you realized the family legend you'd always been told about wasn't quite true. Your story is your discovery, your reckoning with a more complicated reality. The connecting thread here is that when you're in an audience listening to personal stories, you want to connect with the storyteller. You want to see their world. You want to understand how they experienced. Your audience wants to hear from you. They want to learn about you. If you spend your whole story trying to describe someone else's experience, the audience can't connect with you because you're not really a part of the story. You're a narrator. You're a tour guide. But you're not the focus of the story. But when you show us how someone else's story affected you, changed you, or shaped who you are now, the audience can connect with you because you are sharing your feelings, your realizations, your transformation, and you are giving us access into your personal and inner world. And that's what storytelling is supposed to do. Let's think back to John Lennon's piano. People wanted to be near it because it was directly connected to the creation of that song, Imagine. It was directly connected to something meaningful to them. When you tell your own story, your actual emotional experience, you are the piano. You are the direct connection to something real, something true, something honest, something meaningful. You become the direct connection. But when you try to tell someone else's story, you become a light bulb in the pantry. Sure, you were nearby, but you were never really part of the story. Your audience wants the piano. They want the real story. They want you. So be the piano. Okay, let's recap a bit. When you're choosing a story to tell, remember this. You are the story. Other people's experiences, no matter how dramatic, how interesting, aren't yours to tell. You can't authentically share someone else's feelings or inhabit their perspective. You're too far removed from the experience to understand what they felt. So here's what you can do. You can tell the story of how someone else's experience affected you. You can tell us what it means to you, how it changed you, what you learned from it. These are your feelings to share. This is your story to share. The test is simple. Whose emotions are you describing? If it's your emotions, you're in the right territory. If you're trying to speak for someone else's inner world, pull back and try to find a gateway into that story and make it your own. Remember, your audience wants to connect with you. When you try to sell someone else's story, you are hiding. When you tell your own story, even if it involves other people, you're inviting the audience in. So dig into your own experience. Find the moments that changed you, the moments that challenged you, the moments that you learned something new about who you are. These are the stories that only you can tell. Tell a story where you're not the light bulb, you're the piano. And to help further your storytelling, there's another video coming up about how to begin your story. That's it for now. Adios.